About now? Yeah, there we go. Cool. Right, hello. My name's Stephen, as I was just introduced, and I'm going to be talking about CSS animation and going beyond just using transitions. So like I said, my name's Stephen Roberts. You can follow me on Twitter and CodePen. The links are across the bottom the whole way. I've worked in this industry for around about 10 years. I did a lot of agency work, and then I've since moved on to a company called Assembler, where I now do a lot of design, development, and UX, so I sort of look after all of that. But enough about me, and that's not why you're here. So why bother to animate it at all? Well, animation can be used for a number of reasons. Use animation to delight your users. So simple animations can really create a memorable experience, can get people coming back to your website to see the things that you've done, and you can really just grab people's attention with really nice, simple animations. So use animation to inform. So this is using the animation to inform the user that something has changed or something is happening. This is especially useful when submitting forms or pulling down data or anything like that, because you'll be able to give a visual indication that something's happening in the browser and it's not just hung, it's not just stopped. Things like this tend to stop users from clicking around or clicking the button 3 or 4 times, as we saw in the other talk. So you can sort of help aid your user just a few visual cues in animation. And finally, use animation to confirm. So this is quite similar, except it's just confirm that something's happened, confirm that the data has been sent, confirm that something's loading, and all those sorts of things. So why bother to animate in CSS? So CSS is performant, simple, and powerful. And you can see there, performant has a little asterisk next to it. That's because we only have a few safe properties that we can animate in CSS. And those are transform, opacity, and filter. And while that may seem quite limiting, there's quite a lot you can do with just those properties. And it's worth noting as well that in the future, this won't be as much of a problem. Things like the Firefox Quantum Engine will take away a lot of that pain. And the only reason you can't use the other properties, or you shouldn't use them as much, is because it will cause jank or stutter. It will cause your animations to slow down. It will cause quite a lot of performance issues, or it could. So why go beyond transitions? What's wrong with transitions? I think this is my favorite slide. Okay, so we'll just look at a couple of transitions now. Some of them are fairly simple. This is probably things you've done before. So as we hover over here, we change the color. And then on this next one, when we hover over it, it changes to an X. So you can see there the transition code itself is just stroke, 250 milliseconds, and then we're going to apply a timing function of ease in and out. And then same for this one, except we're going to animate all of the properties, not just the color. And then magic happens. Because it's not quite that simple. You've still got to tell it when and what to animate. So here, that menu turning into a cross is made up of 4 lines. So the middle bit is 2 lines stacked on top of each other. So then when we hover over, we hide the top and bottom lines and then transform the middle lines out over to create a cross. Simple-ish. So one more quick example. So these are just some cards that you might have on any typical website, and the bottom corner is going to be used to show a category or to show a name or something like that. And as we hover over, that's revealed. So again, this is using transitions, not animations. So upon hover, we're going to change the border width of the after and the opacity of the before. So the after is the rectangular corner, and the before is the text. So that's pretty cool. So transitions are awesome, but limited. We can only animate from one value to another, and we require some sort of interaction in order for it to fire. So this is where we're going to go beyond transitions. So none of this is exactly new. CSS animations have been around forever. So why am I standing on a stage in 2019 talking to you about it? Because it just feels underused. It feels since Apple went and killed Flash, the animation's taken a bit of a backseat on the web. No one seems to really be doing much with it. There's a couple of websites where you're like, oh, that's cool, but that's kind of about it. Whereas we've got this tool in CSS that has quite a simple syntax. You can do so much with it, and we can bring the web to life again like it was back before Apple. Okay, so I'm going to stop complaining now and inspire you instead, or at least try. So this is the first animation we're going to look at, and it's a simple scrolling mouse. You've probably seen something like this. They usually sit at the bottom of like a hero area or something, just to indicate to the user that you can scroll down. So how does it work? So this animation is made up of an SVG and just two elements inside there. There's a rectangle and a circle, and we've given them both a class name. So the first thing to do is to style the elements within our SVG. So we're just going to give stroke color and width, a fill color and an opacity for the actual scroll, and then we can see we've managed to style our mouse. So then we can move, once we've got our styling, we can move on to the animation. So here we're saying we have a keyframe animation called scroll, and from 0 to 20%, we're not going to do anything. And then from 20% to 100%, we're going to move along the y-axis 36 pixels, and then we're also going to elongate the shape, which is by stretching it along the y-axis using scale y, and then we're also going to fade it out. So now that we've created our animation, we need to set that. So we give it an animation name, duration, and an iteration count, and it didn't work. So why didn't it work? So we were missing the transform origin property. So this is quite important when you're animating, especially with SVG and things like that, because they're not using the regular DOM. They have their own DOM, separate to the HTML one. So here we're saying we're going to transform from the center and from 20 pixels. And then once we've applied that, we can see it's starting to move down over where it was kind of just stretched on the spot before. So it's nearly what we had as the example, but not quite. So here's the two side by side. The one on the left sort of dropping down and stretching, and the one on the right is what we're aiming for. So without going back and changing our animation, we can accomplish that with one line of code. So here we're just using the animation timing function, and we're using cubic Bezier instead of one of the preset values like linear or ease in or ease out or anything like that. But cubic Bezier just allows you to add custom functions. The numbers look horrible, but don't worry about that. There's generators and all that sort of thing out there, so you can go and have a play and see what looks good, what doesn't, and what you're aiming for. So then when we apply that, you can see we now sort of have that nice uptick a little as it sort of goes up and then comes down again. So in less than 2-3 minutes of talking, we've gone from completely installed SVG to a finished animation. So it's not bad, but you've probably seen something like that before. Let's see if I can really impress you this time. So this animation is created entirely with SVG and CSS. So how did I do it? So the key to this is the animation steps function. We'll come back to that in a moment, but that's really the key to what's happening here. So step one for creating this animation was creating the image itself. So started by drawing one of the poses as a vector. I think I used Sketch, but you can use whatever you want. And then you go ahead and draw the remaining poses. In my case, it ended up being 10. That was because it was a time factor that I needed to get the work done. 10's a nice round number for doing maths, which is always fun. And 10 actually works okay in terms of not seeing it stutter as it replays. So once I had all of my separate bird elements, I split them into equally sized cells. The actual boxes aren't needed. That's just to show you where I've positioned the birds. And then now that we've done that, we can move on to make the bird fly. So in our HTML, we create an element, can be a div or whatever you want, and give that a class of bird, and we then set that image we've just created as the background for our element. We're then setting a width and height, and we're using the will change property, which is a performance property. We're just saying that the background position is going to change. So if you prepare yourself for that, we're just telling the browser that this is going to change. Prepare yourself, and then we hopefully will see less stutters and things like that. The width and height I'll come back to here. So the height was just a random number I chose. 125 pixels look good. And then to get the width, we take the size of our original SVG, divide that by the number of frames, and that will give us the width of one frame. So that ended up being 88 pixels. So then when we look at that, we can see that that's just one frame of that image. So if we go to our actual animation and create that, luckily here we just need one line and that's it. So our animation fly cycle just says when you get to the end, the background position will have moved negative 900 pixels on the x-axis. So then we apply that. So we apply the animation name. Like I said, the animation timing function. What that is doing is instead of like linear or moving from one element to another, it's going to step through whatever you tell it, however many times you tell it to. So because we're moving background position and we're doing it over 10 steps, it's going to move across that image 10 times in the number of in the time that we set. So I'm setting it to repeat infinitely, so it's just going to keep going. So then I'm setting the duration and delay for the first bird, and I'm saying the animation duration is going to take 1 second, and I've set a negative delay here, and what that does is say that once the page loads, the animation will already be running. So that's our bird flying on the spot. So now that we've got one, we can go and create multiple variations of that. In my case, I've created 4, so we have birds 2, 3, and 4. I'm using BEM modifiers to set the names, and then I'm just setting different durations and delays. And by doing that, we're using the same element and the same animation, but we're just offsetting them slightly. And what that does is create a non-linear, repeatable animation. So all of these are exactly the same, but just running in different timings and different delays. So now that we've got our bird flying on the spot, we now need to move it across the screen. So first of all, we wrap our bird in a container, position that container off the page, and then we can move on to our animation. So this is actually a bit more complicated than the last few I've shown. There's a number of steps to it. So to begin with, I'm saying the translate y value, which is up and down on the y-axis, is 0. Translate x is -10, so we're pushing it off to the left, and then I've set the scale down to 0.3. Then as we reach 10% of our way through our animation, we're just moving along that y-axis, along the x-axis. So what we're doing there is not just flying in a straight line from left to right, we're sort of going up and down as we go. And I'm also setting the scale up and down as we go to give the illusion of depth. So by doing that, it sort of looks like the bird's getting closer and further away by changing its scale. And then there's a number of steps between there, but by the time we reach 60% of the way through our animation, I want it to be finished. So it's going to be off the other side of the screen and not visible anymore. Now the reason for stopping at 60% and repeating those values at 100 is that if we want to create a delay between the animation iterations, there's no syntax to do that. You can't say, repeat infinitely but delay 3 seconds between each one. There's no way to do that. So the way that you do it is by setting the same values as different parts of your keyframes. So by 60% we're finished, but it's going to keep running until that 100% and still be off the side. So then when it comes back around, the others will still be going, which you'll see in a moment. So then we need to apply that. We've got our timing function of just linear, and the iteration count is infinite, so it's just going to keep going, and we've set the name. So we need to do what we did before, set our duration and delay, and then we can set it going. So there's our first bird. So if we then create our other variations like we did with the single bird, just set different durations, different delays. I'm not setting negative delays here because I want them to sort of follow each other across the screen, so it's delays of 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds, something like that. And then we can see that run. Cool, right? So, what else? So this is animation I created for Assembler for favoriting your suppliers, and when we run it, it sort of grows, shrinks, fills in, and we get those lovely sort of pop of circles around it. So how did we do that? Again, we turn to SVG. First we create our image. So we create our SVG, create a path, give it an ID, and then we can move on to actually write our heart shape, which is nice and simple, M12.74516. No, I'm kidding. Use something like Sketch or some sort of vector editor somewhere where it can output this for you so that you don't have to write it yourself. All credit to you if you can write a heart in SVG without using an editor. So there we have our shape. Export that as an SVG. And then we're going to add the circles in afterwards. We'll do this just by hand because this is really simple. It's just 8 circles. So we just create a group for them, position that group in the center, and then just create 8 circles. So our next step is to create that animation. But as before, we need to create our initial styling for our SVG. So we're setting a stroke width, a fill color, and then we're setting the transform origin. And then there's our initial styling for our heart. So next we can move on to create the animation, and we're going to animate the transform, fill, and stroke. So if we start with the color, at 33% of the way through our animation, we want the fill to remain the same color, but the stroke to change, and then by the end we want both the stroke and the fill color to have changed. The reason for that will become apparent in a moment. So then once we've done the color, we can look at our scale. So we want to say by that 33% mark, which when our stroke has changed, but the actual fill hasn't, we want the heart to shrink. And then as it's doing the rest, we want it to come up above its original size and then back down to its original size. So by setting the scale to match the stroke color and then having everything else happen at the end, we managed to sort of choreograph our animation. So as it's getting smaller, the stroke's filling in, and then as it's coming back up, that's when it starts to fill the color itself. So then we can move on to our circles. Again, initial styling, we just want to position them. The reason for the transition there of just being really short, 1 millisecond, is because on the reverse, when you click it for a second time, I don't want it to animate back in. I just want it to stop. And then we've positioned them. There they are, all on top of each other, all 8 circles. And then we need to position them in the right position. So here I'm using a for loop in SAS, but you could do this by hand if you wanted. But I'm just saying rotate each of the circles by the iteration that we're on, and 45 degrees, so it'll increase by 45 each time, and then we're going to move it out over, away from the center on the x-axis. It's important to know that if you do the translate before the rotate, it will perform them in that order, so it will move and then rotate, as opposed to rotating then moving. So that's definitely worth noting. So there we have our positions of our circles around the heart. So next we just want to move those styles to when it's actually active, because we don't want the heart's circles to be positioned around like that all of the time. So then we can create some additional styles for when it is active, and all we're doing here is just saying for the circles we're going to transition the transform property and the opacity property. So we're going to animate the moving left and the fading out. So this is really slowed down so you can see exactly what's happening. And then this is the actual size and speed that it runs at on the website. Cool. But the birds were better, right? So what else? So this is an animation I created for a front-end framework that I wrote a long time ago now. But the animation I think is still really cool. There's nothing on here that I haven't already showed you how to do. So the majority of what's going on here is just translate or transform, translate in the Y axis or translate in the X axis. And then I'm just hiding the overflow. So on the slider in the middle, that's just using steps like I did for the birds, and it's just stepping through the animation as opposed to being smooth. And then again with the scrolling ones, they're just a smooth up and down animation. So the only thing different here is the actual drawing, which happens at first. So how do we draw in code? We can do this with CSS, and we can do this with SVG. So the two properties that we need to do this are the stroke dash array and stroke dash offset. So the circle itself, sorry, not the circle itself, I've created a circle, it's worth noting, and we've set a stroke width, a color, and then we've set a dash array of 50. So setting a dash array is just going to put gaps in the stroke, and the number you set inside the dash array is how big the gap will be. So by setting the gap to 50, we can see we've created a 50 pixel gap, and then a 50 pixel stroke, and then a 50 pixel gap. And it'll just repeat infinitely. So if we take that stroke dash array and increase it to be the full circumference of the circle, which in this case is 940, we have a stroke that covers the entire circle, but we also have a gap that will cover the entire circle as well. So if we then move on to offset, this is where we can start offsetting where the stroke drawing starts. So by setting that to 50, we create like a little bit of that. We start to see 50 pixels of that gap, and the rest is of the stroke that we've created. And if we set the gap to be all the way up to the circumference of our circle, the same as the dash array was, we then have no stroke whatsoever. We do, but it's just hidden because it's being pushed off, and we're only seeing the gap. So then we can animate that. So once we've pushed all of our outlines out of the way so that we can't see any of them, we can animate that back into view using keyframes. So I've got a keyframe animation here called draw, and we're setting the stroke dash offset back to 0. So it's going from 940 back to 0 where it started. Then all we need to do is run that animation. So we set the animation name, the duration, and then I'm setting fill mode, animation fill mode here to forwards. And basically all that means is once you reach the end of the animation, don't go back to what its original value was, just keep the values from the end. And then when we run that, you can see we've drawn the outline of the circle. So it's literally all I've done there is just applied a different durations and different delays and things like that, and then the whole thing gets drawn on load. So one more example. So this is where the talk really came from. About a year and a half ago, I wrote an article for Web Designer Mag, and as part of that we went and looked at a whole bunch of animations from around the web that were done either using Flash or JavaScript or something like that, and we looked to see if we could recreate them all in CSS. And the whole point of this was the cover for the piece when it came out. It was an actual print magazine. So we decided that we would also, on top of that, do an animation of the cover using all of the techniques that we've discussed. So I thought it would be a nice way to sort of end my talk would be to talk about this particular animation and how we got there. So the bit I'd like to talk about specifically is this little jumping eye. So how did I do it? So again, it's all SVG, but then we jumped into our code and we start creating our keyframes. So we're saying here our keyframe is called bounce, and then at 25% of the way through the animation, we're going to move up along the y-axis 24 pixels, and then by 35% of the animation, we're back down on the ground. So then when we run that, it works, but it's kind of dull. It doesn't really have any life to it. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't even feel like a cartoon. It just looks a bit bland. So we want to breathe some life into our animation. We want to see if we can sprinkle some of that Pixar magic on it. So when I need to do something like that, what I tend to do is turn to storyboarding. Storyboarding allows you to quickly plan your animations. As you can see, you do not need to be able to draw. But basically all this is doing is saying number 1 is where we'll start. Number 2, we're going to duck down ready to jump. Number 3 is reaching the top of our jump. Number 4 is the landing. And then 5 and 6 is that kind of springing back into position once you've landed. So once you've got your plan, how do you code that? So step 1, which we were saying is ducking down ready to jump. We're going to scale the y-axis, so we're going to squash it along the y-axis 80%. So we're going to scale from being this big down to here. And then the next point is our actual jump. So at that point, we're going to move along the y-axis like we had before, up 24 pixels, but we're then also going to bring the scale back up to its normal size. Because when you jump, you tend to stretch out as you reach the top of your jump. I've also, I'm running the animation on 25 to 27% of the way through. By having that sort of, that little bit in the middle of 25, 26, and 27 where it's all got the same properties, it means that it'll sort of hang at the top of the jump a little bit before coming back down. So then step 3 was the landing. So at 35% of our animation, we're landing again. We've ducked down, we've gone up, we're coming back down for the landing. So translate y is at 0. Our scale is at 95% of its original size, because when you land, you tend to shrink slightly. And then our last one is bringing that sort of spring back to where its original position was. And again, I'm finishing here at like 40%, because I want it to run and I want it to repeat infinitely, but I want that delay between repeats. So again, that springing back is, so we drop down to 95 and then we go back up to 1. So really we've added 5 or 6 different steps to this animation, and we've managed to make it look a lot more alive and feel much more playful than it did before, where it was just up, straight back down. And then in context with all of the others, you can see we're just doing the same thing with the A's. So the flashing A's, again, use the same animation. They're just offset delays. Same with the jumping eyes. They both use the same animation. It's just different delays. So what do all of the animations I've shown you have in common? Well, they're all created with CSS, and the majority of them were created with SVG. But most of all, it's that the majority of them are simple and effective. It's simple in its idea. It's not trying to be overly complicated. It's not trying to do too much. And I think that's kind of the key to a lot of animation, is finding something that's quite simple but really grabs your attention. So I hope I've managed to leave you feeling inspired to go have a play with SVG and CSS animations. There's a collection of everything I've talked about over on CodePen. I will tweet that link out though, so if you want to follow me, I'll make sure that gets out there. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen.